Thank you very much. Thank you for those of you who have waited for this session. I know that we're a bit delayed, but I promise you it will be worth the wait. This is one of the most important discussions that we can have at this summit. As the announcer said, we are focusing on early childhood education, why we need to finance it, how we are doing today, and what kinds of solutions can we put in place. I'm joined today by a very distinguished panel, and it is my privilege to invite them to the stage. First, Ted Chaiban, who's the Regional Director of the Middle East and North Africa for UNICEF. Anita, Anastacio, who is the initiative lead of Refugee, Playful Beginnings from the Lego Foundation. Asif Saleh, who is the Executive Director of BRAC. Michael Feigelson, who is the CEO of the Van Leer Group, will be joining us virtually. And Dr. Yido, the Director of UNESCO's International Bureau of Education. Please welcome them. Before we engage in discussion here, I would like to first give our speaker, Sherrie Weston, who's the president of Sesame Workshop, the floor. She will have a few minutes introduction via pre-recorded video.
It's an honor to be a part of the Rewired Summit, and I want to thank Dubai Cares for the opportunity to welcome you all to this important discussion on investing in early childhood. At Sesame Workshop, we always encourage curiosity, and we love to ask questions, especially all the W questions. You'll hear more about the who, what, when, and where of financing ECD from our distinguished panelists. But to start this session, I want to focus on the why. Why should we invest in early childhood development? Sometimes these basic questions are the trickiest. Just try answering a 3-year-old's why questions and you'll see what I mean. But in this case, the why couldn't be easier. It's the smart thing to do. First, we know that early childhood is the most critical time for a child's healthy brain development. We have decades of research that demonstrate the importance of a child's early years. Evidence shows that from birth to age 3, the brain develops faster than at any other time. And by age 5, up to 90% of a child's brain has already developed. The foundation for lifelong learning, health, and productivity is laid during this crucial window. This is also a period when the brain is most sensitive to a child's environment, when external experiences shape the architecture of the developing brain. That makes this an especially vital period for children who would experience adversity. Neuroscience has proven that during a child's early years, repeated exposure to traumatic events can inhibit brain development with long-term repercussions. Imagine how disruptive issues like conflict and displacement are for a young child. But we also know the promise of early intervention and access to quality ECD. If we can reach children early with high-quality support, playful learning, and nurturing care, we can help mitigate the negative impacts of adversity and provide children with the tools they need to succeed in school and life. That leads me to my second point. The benefits of early investment go beyond children. They improve outcomes for families, communities, economies, and societies at large. When we reach children with comprehensive early childhood services, not only education, but health, nutrition, and responsive caregiving, we advance multiple sustainable development goals. We all know the SDGs are interdependent, and early childhood investment accelerates progress toward many of the most ambitious goals, from reducing poverty and inequality, to promoting gender equity and lifelong learning, to fostering more peaceful and inclusive societies for all. It all starts with ECD. Lastly, the return on investment is unparalleled. We know that investing in ECD is the greatest investment we can make in our long-term collective future. As Nobel Prize winning economist James Heckman found, investing in ECD provides an estimated 13% annual return on investment through improved education, health, and economic outcomes for societies at large. That means that every dollar spent on pre-primary education results in $9 of benefits to society. The evidence, the benefit across outcomes, and the proven return on investment give us a clear and compelling answer to the question of why we should invest in quality ECD. As we've all grappled with a global pandemic, we've seen just how important it is for us to reach young children and their caregivers with playful learning, especially when there's no access to formal education. So as we enter yet another year amid the COVID-19 pandemic, investing in ECD is all the more crucial. Not only is COVID an unprecedented challenge, but it's a test of our shared responsibility to the youngest generation, especially those who were already vulnerable and are now at risk of being left even further behind. I have to say that in my travels to visit Sesame workshop programs around the world, I've had the privilege of talking to so many parents and caregivers. And the one thing I find we always have in common is hope for our children. Whether it's a Rohingya father in Cox's Bazar, an Afghan mother who has fled her country, or a grandmother in South Africa raising her grandchildren in the uncertainty of the pandemic, what they say they most want is a brighter future for their children. And there is reason for hope in a world full of challenges that can seem overwhelming. For many of them, the solution is right before us. An investment in early childhood is an investment in a better future for us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherrie, for making the case why we need to invest in early childhood development and education so clear. We're here today because we're obviously not meeting the goals that we've set out. And the challenge is quite large given that education budgets around the world are stretched. Currently, only 2% of education budgets, national education budgets globally, are dedicated to early childhood development. And make no mistake, rich countries as well as ones that have lesser resources are extremely challenged in this area. So it is a global challenge for all of us, not just for the global south. To meet the Sustainable Development Goals, or to be on track for it, we need to have every country dedicate at least 10% of its national education budget towards early childhood development. Currently, aid commitments towards early childhood development or education is 1%. That's simply not good enough. We need to do much better. And here to tell us how we can do better is an esteemed panel of organizations that are fully committed to this cause. Now, Ted, I know you have been delayed and you have to get going to another session, so I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind. If you could help us understand how UNICEF is working with governments to help protect the investments in early childhood development, which has become even more urgent, as we heard Sherrie say, given the challenges that COVID has placed on countries globally.
Thank you, Maysa, and thank you for bringing us together for this important panel. I mean, what we've had with COVID is a situation where there's been a crisis of care and learning where parents have become first responders at precisely the moment where budgets and economies have come under immense stress. So it has been really important to make the case for protecting investment in early childhood development. And how has UNICEF worked with countries to do this? The first thing we've done is, in fact, make the investment case. And we've just heard some statistics. But let me give you the example of the state of Palestine, where UNICEF has worked with government and other constituents to put together an investment case and demonstrate that by investing not only in early education and care, but also in immunization, in nutrition, in essential social cash transfers to poor families in society. By investing $1 billion over the next 5 years, the return on investment for Palestine would be between 11 billion and 34 billion for that generation of children. And that kind of investment case really convinces ministries of finance to try to protect those kind of investments. The second thing that we've done is really to try to see how we could piggyback on COVID-19 responses and work with a number of countries to ensure that as part of COVID-19 responses, early childhood development financing, including for early education, is protected. Case in point is Tajikistan, where as part of their COVID-19 response, there were cash transfers and support to preschool teachers and caregivers as part of a package in response to COVID-19. Thirdly, has been to analyze current budget expenditure and look at trends. So in Argentina, for example, there was a detailed analysis of what was happening to the budget during the month of COVID-19 pandemic. And there, that budget analysis, that emphasis on data, as the previous panel was saying, that emphasis on data helped actually increase expenditure in Argentina on early childhood development services. All of this, I think, means nothing if preschools, creches are not open. And so the fourth thing we have done is to support countries to reopen creches and preschools in a safe, cost-effective way. In neighboring Oman, for example, there was a piloting of what that would look like, how much it would cost to keep the school safe and clean, but open, so that children could still have access to early learning and parents could still go to work. These are some of the very practical ways that we're engaging in promoting investment in early childhood and early childhood education in particular.
Thanks very much. And Ted, as you have to go a bit earlier, I don't want to miss the opportunity of asking my second question to you, which is, are you hopeful that we're going to see more investment in early childhood development in 22?
So look, I think the case is clear. It is one of the most cost-effective investments that a country can make. So I think we're committed to doing three things in order to make sure that that has the best chance of being the case. Firstly is to work on a global advocacy campaign in order that we do not let early childhood development fall off the agenda. There's been this enormous focus on young people in the transition from learning to earning. But frankly, if you don't invest in that first part of life, those first 1,000 days and early education, you already are behind the curve when it comes to the second decade and the investment in young people. So really, it's a mutually reinforcing investment. The second thing we're doing is looking at innovative financing and specifically working with the Education Outcome Fund to look at results-based financing for early childhood education and try to get different sources of non-traditional funding involved, including those in the private sector. And then the third thing is indeed to continue to make these investment cases, to demonstrate how effective it is, how cost-effective it is to invest in early childhood development. It's not just cost-effective, it's also the right thing to do. So to work beyond ministries of education, beyond ministries of health, with ministries of finance to make that case. So I'm hoping if all of us band together, we will indeed see a continuation in investment in early childhood development, and that will not be one of the areas where governments and other constituents cut. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and congratulations on your recent appointment in global leadership on COVID. It must be a massive challenge ahead of you.
Thank you, Maysa.
Thank you very much. Is Michael Feigelson online with us virtually?
I am. Can you hear me?
Hi. Thank you so much
Hi.
for joining us. Now, I know that you have been waiting online patiently for quite some time. Would you like me to jump to you now, or are you ready to?
Sure.
All right,
I'm
wonderful.
ready to go.
So Michael heads up the Van Leer group, which also includes important work that they do philanthropically. And it's an organization that invests quite a lot and has a leadership role in early childhood development. And I wanted to ask you to talk to us about the approaches that you found effective particularly around engaging parents, and also ideas that you may have in financing early childhood development as we go forward from here.
Sure. Thanks, Maysa, and thank you for the invitation. Sorry I couldn't be there in person with you. I think, as you said, we've been working on the topic of early childhood development since 1965 all over the world, and there's always been a challenge of financing. And I think that although the case has become clearer for why, and both Ted and Sherrie spoke to that, the challenge of the financial resources continues, and we've experienced in the last couple of years the shrinking fiscal space. So one of the ways that we've approached this is to try to figure out how to work with governments to do more with less. And one of the types of policies and programs we've focused on have been parenting programs, parent coaching programs, where somebody, whether it's a health worker or a social worker, or a preschool teacher, works with the parents to try and promote healthy behaviors for child development at home. And we like this approach because you can often use existing staff on the ground, existing workers, so the government isn't faced with expanding the payroll in as big a way as it might be if it was pursuing universal childcare, for example. It can target more easily the most vulnerable families, so it can be cheaper in that sense as well. And it doesn't have to be a daily activity. And so just to give two examples, we've worked with the government of Brazil to add a parent coaching component to a cash transfer program that reaches about 3.7 million kids under 3 living in poverty. And it's scaled up to just over 1 million kids in the last couple of years. And it cost about $300 a year per family. And that's compared to a year of, let's say, public primary education, which I think is in the range of $3,800, or for the OECD is $8,000. Another example is in Peru, where we have worked with the government for a number of years on a program called Cuna Más, where they make home visits to families, and they both do the coaching and they use the opportunity to make referrals to other services, and thereby getting some more efficiencies in the overall system of services for the government. And that cost about $300 per year. One example from the Netherlands, where they've added a parent coaching to the prenatal services, and that adds about 57 euros to the service that normally costs around 600. And they get several important outcomes. I'm just giving these examples to give a sense of the cost and that it can be done in a relatively reasonable way and can often use existing workers. So that's why we've pursued the parent coaching programs and policies, because we think it can be done even within shrinking fiscal space and can help governments figure out the best way to use the resources that are limited that they already have. I will say, and this would be my last observation, that this doesn't solve the problem of universal childcare or universal access to preschool education. Those do require large new numbers of staff. Those are very expensive. And I think in order to get the kind of investment that we need in those areas, there really needs to be a shift in the way that societies value economically the work of caregiving and taking care of young kids. We know that caregiving work can be up to 43% of a country's GDP. I think everybody who has had their kids home from childcare and school during COVID knows how hard it is to work and take care of kids at the same time. I would hope that awareness that many people have from lived experience that they might not have had before from this year translates into a change in how we value economically caregiving work, but I think that remains to be seen. So that's what I had to share, Maysa, but happy to answer any questions you have.
Thanks very much. Yeah, if you can hang on with us a bit longer, I'll definitely come back to you with some questions. Dr. Yido, if I can come to you now and try to understand from you how you think governments can play a critical role in strengthening the curriculum so that it is more inclusive and it is focused on quality as a means of attracting more funding for early childhood development. I think it's on. Yeah, try. Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. What I would like to say in that, responding to your question, is that yes, indeed, we have to show through the education policies the importance of early childhood education, because as long as we have not seen in a national education policy the importance of early childhood education, it will be difficult to attract funding from the donors. You were quoting the figures saying that about 2% of the globally of the education budget is dedicated to early childhood education. I would say that in developing countries is less than 1% that is globally dedicated to early childhood education. And the reasons are, among others, it has been said, the fact that we don't have evidence on the return on investment, this is one thing, and even we don't have evidence on the importance of it, of early childhood education for the education, the thorough education of the boy when he has a very good early childhood education opportunities. His learning outcomes throughout all the learning process up to the university are improved. All these elements of evidence, they are not evident. They have to be documented more and shared to convince that, yes, it's worth investing in, because it's not evident. Countries will say that the priority for them is to get the kids, all the school-age kids to school. This is their priority. But before they go to school, the importance of offering them learning opportunities is not a priority per se. But if we are able to document and show it, it will convince some that we have to invest in. And this is what we are trying to do in the International Bureau of Education, trying to accompany our member states so that when they are formulating the education policies, they make sure that the importance of early childhood education is clearly seen in the policy. Because as you know, the Paris Declaration 2005 said that donors, partners should align on national priorities. But at country level, when a bilateral or multilateral partner is reading the national education policy and he doesn't see the importance of early childhood education in the national policy, he is not going to invest in. What we are doing in UNESCO globally and also IBE particularly, it was said since the beginning of this meeting that everything is based on partnerships. How can we mobilize partners around a thematic? In countries, very few partners are interested in early childhood education. And what UNESCO is doing, last month, 2 months ago, UNESCO created, with the support of partners like UNICEF, Dubai Care, etc., the global partnership on early childhood education. For us, it is a platform that will gather all the partners who are interested in early childhood education so that they can put funds together. And the first meeting of this platform is going to take place in Tashkent by November 2022, where we are going to gather all the people interested in early childhood education to see what can be the priorities and the plan of action that can be put in place to accompany member states so that they can better invest in early childhood education. The last thing I would like to say is that it's important that we try to also advocate so that at the national level, the ministries, in the organigram of the ministry, the people in charge of early childhood education should be in a higher position in the ministries so that their voice can be heard better. But when these people are occupying very low functions in the organigram of a ministry, their voice is not heard. So therefore, the thematic cannot be advocated to be put forward. So this also is something on which we have to work with member states. Yeah. Yes. Finally, about curriculum, you know, we are last November, UNESCO launched with all our 193 member states what we call the features of education. It was a long process that lasted 2 years and came out with a report, a global report on the features of education, rethinking education in the future, transformation of education is in this document. So also, you know, we are talking about competencies of 21st centuries. We are also talking about competencies out of the Berlin Declaration on climate change education. So for us in IBE, working on curriculum, the main task for us is all this global commitment. What do they mean in terms of curriculum for learning? Starting by early childhood education. When you talk about the competencies of 21st centuries, what does it mean? What can we do in early stage for early childhood education curriculum so that we are sure we capture the necessary skills that are going to be taught throughout the education, but start at early childhood education stage to make sure these skills are really properly rooted right at the beginning of education. And this is one of the area of priority of work for us in IBE. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yido. I think what I'm hearing you say is that you're working closely with ministries to make sure they have the evidence, they understand the critical importance of investing in it, providing support and advocating for positioning ECD as central to the global education agenda. And I think one of the aspects of all of this, of course, is how do we come back to this panel, how do we finance that? I don't think that there's any real resistance to the idea of investing more in early childhood development, but it's the how do we put more money into it, in what, to make it most effective. And here I want to come to my colleague Anita, who is here representing the Lego Foundation, one of the largest, if not the largest, private foundations investing in early childhood development. And Anita works on something that's very close to my heart, which is how do we make sure we don't forget about children in conflict zones. So Anita, why does the Lego Foundation prioritize investing in this space? And what are you seeing we need to be doing differently as a global community based on your extensive experience in this space?
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Maysa, for giving me the word. I know it's been after lunch. How many of you had lunch? Not yet? Some of you, okay. Well, let's just say, I think we could all just use a little bit of movement, just like children. And what I want to ask you to do is just, I want to know how many of you are parents. And if you are, just stand up. All right. And then I want to ask you if you are siblings of others. Are you a sibling? Stand up. Are you a grandparent? Are you a grand aunt? So you all know and have all witnessed, most likely, when a young child grows up, right? So what Sherrie said about the early moments and being the most critical stage in the life of a child, you probably know what I mean, right? And what Sherrie meant. Language acquisition, vision and hearing, cognitive function all starts in the first 1,000 days as Ted was saying. So I think it's nothing, no surprise, and to all the parents of very young children who had their children at home during the pandemic, I bow to you, because I cannot imagine what that must have been like. So I've seen it from my little grandniece and their parents, but just, there's nothing, and I'm privileged to live in a country that was the first country to open up early childhood care, child care centers, early learning centers, before any other education services started, right? So I was very privileged to live in a country where a government saw the importance of getting young children into care, into childcare, so that parents also got some relief, right? As we heard from Michael, parental engagement is really crucial. The audience that we are looking at the Lego Foundation, while we are focusing on children, it's really parents, social workers, health workers, early educators, right? Those are the ones, the target that we look at are influencing those people that care the most of young children. So at the Lego Foundation, we see and have recognized the enormous needs. What Maysa talked about, the little money that goes into early childhood education, we have seen this. We also have a mission and are driven by this strong belief that we can change the way children learn. And we do so by bringing play into the arena. And if anyone was here yesterday and had a chance to play with Lego bricks and had seen the types of skills that are developed in 5 minutes of playing, or that you are getting stimulated, not skills yet, but stimulated in, are a great experience. So we do believe that the power of learning through play has not just benefits for learning, but multiple benefits, particularly for children in adversity and those that are affected by conflict and crisis. So we believe that we can harness the power of play to bring that not just to young children, but to parents. It's good for well-being. Wasn't that fun yesterday when you were playing? It was fun, right? And it helped you, and it was good, and it was not boring, it was joyful. And so we believe that we can make a difference, not just in young children, but in how parents interact with children, in how social workers, healthcare workers can interact with children and engage in early stimulation, in these connections in the brain that are formed so early on and are so crucial. We also believe that children in adversity can benefit from early learning because they have tremendous risk, as Sherrie said, right? They are exposed to many more risks than we have. Parents who are tired, who cannot work, etc. We also believe that we cannot do this alone. And we also believe that we can, in the education sector, not do this alone. We need other sectors. This is a multi-stakeholder effort that requires health ministries, food security, ministries of labor and social affairs, social welfare services. It requires everyone. So if you go back, talk to your ministers of finance about it requires a multi-stakeholder approach. It requires partners at all levels, from those in the community to organizations, to the government, to funders, to decision makers with lots of money, like Global Partnership for Education, Education Cannot Wait, the World Bank, UNICEF. We are all decision makers here, and we can change how we think about early childhood education, especially for children in crisis. Let me just say that at the Lego Foundation, one of the very first investments we made was in stable context in early childhood. And we then followed a call to invest our very first, very large investment in humanitarian settings. And we did so because we knew there were no proven interventions, or very few. There was no evidence, and we need evidence for governments to make decisions and to invest. And we needed to have strong partners who have a voice and can bring that voice of young children, their parents, and the care workers that work for them to the arena, to the global stage, to make a difference in how we finance for early childhood education. We also, lastly, believe that those skills that you can develop in the early stages in life will set you up, regardless of where you go, in these uncertain times. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anita, for that energetic interjection and for all the important messages that you just threw out there. I'm not going to attempt to recap them, but just to say, I think that as somebody who's run foundations and worked in the global education arena for a long time, we have been, so fortunate to have Lego Foundation as an ally in early childhood education in refugee settings, and the investments that you've made have really helped set a standard and have paved the way forward, hopefully for many other foundations to follow your lead. And for those who are interested in learning more about Lego's investment in Sesame Workshop and IRC in Iftah Ahlan Simsim, we are having a podcast that's doing a deep dive on that. So if you follow the Impact Room, which I host, along with Philanthropy Age, that's coming up really soon. I learned a ton in that episode, and I think the global education community wants to hear what's happened in that initiative, why it's important, and what are the lessons learned going forward. And this connects very nicely to BRAC, because of course BRAC had a very important, or has a very important role to play in that initiative in Bangladesh. Asif runs BRAC, which is one of the largest NGOs in the world. I've had the privilege, I was just telling him, to work with his team on thinking about how we improve research and support for those who are on the front line serving children in conflict zones, and particularly because you've been playing an important role in supporting Rohingya refugees. So I would love to hear from you today, maybe a little bit more about the Play Labs model, because maybe not everyone here knows about it. Why this has been effective as an approach, and what can the global education community learn from that, and where are you going with it?
Thank you so much. And in the business world, there is this notion called the perfect problem. So if you can identify the perfect problem and come up with a solution towards that, you maximize your business opportunity or profit. For social enterprises like BRAC, we look at where are the other perfect social problems where we can maximize impact. So just to give you a little bit of background on some of what motivated us to come to do this Play Lab, in the 90s, the government of Bangladesh said that we want to get every single child to primary school. But we are having a hard time getting particularly girls to school. And so we started talking to all the parents who are not sending their girls and their children to school. What we heard from them was that very practical challenges. Need flexible time, it's too far from my home, I don't feel safe with my girls being at school. So what we came up with was a model which addresses every single problems of those. Flexible timing, school at the community level, not infrastructure focused, parents, teachers meeting. But the idea was that making primary education affordable, high quality, but deliver it at low cost so that it can scale, not compromising on fidelity. So a lot of focus went into developing curriculum. So then at one point, BRAC ran about 64,000 of these one-room schools across the country. But then we have scaled down because government has now built a lot of the primary schools. But in 2015, we started rolling out this Play Lab model because by then we realized that's the next frontier because children are dropping out of school. There are big learning gaps. So how do we come up with a model which is scalable and which addresses some of these challenges but harnesses the power of the community? The Play Lab model essentially is very much around building a holistic environment, joyful environment for children who are aged from 3 to 5, going to an early childhood center, and facilitated by a local community's adolescent girl who has been trained to become what we call the play leaders, and deliver sort of a learning outcome in 5 areas: social and emotional learning, language development, cognitive development, motor skills, and self-regulation. So these are the 5 areas we actually focus on, but in a way which is very, very play-oriented. But there are 2 important parts of that. One is that it has to be culturally contextualized. So the games that you play, the play that you do has to be localized, local. So the Play Lab in Bangladesh looks very different from Play Lab in Uganda. But the ethos is the same. And the second part is that community and the parents have to be very much engaged in this process. So we rolled out the model in Bangladesh, Tanzania, and Uganda in 2015. 2017, the Rohingya crisis happened. We had 1 million refugees come over from Myanmar. And the idea was that we saw the need to do the same in that setting, as Anita was mentioning, because there were children who were traumatized. And what we saw, so we developed that model of humanitarian play lab. So what we saw that not only it helps the children to heal, but at the same time it improves the overall community's environment in a very abnormal environment, right? So now here the challenge is now that how do we scale this up? When the financing is tight and we have a model that is scalable, so what do we do? The results are very, very encouraging. Just to give you, the evidence just came in from Cambridge University last week, which actually shows that in the 2-year intervention, there was a control group which didn't get the intervention, ECD intervention, and control group which did get the intervention. And when you compare in all of the areas, the learning outcome, development outcome has been 5.5 times greater where children have got the ECD intervention.
It's incredible. Round of applause, please.
And what's more dramatic is that kids who have been in the below the curve, who started in a bottom baseline, their growth has been far, far higher. So by the time of the end of the 2-year process, they're more at par up to speed. So this is very important because particularly on the language side, because this is the foundation for your basic literacy. And these are the children who would tend to drop out from primary education, and hence the link between ECD and primary is very, very interlinked. So not only that, in terms of looking at also the perspective of the parents' involvement in the child rearing and ECD, the development has been phenomenal. Particularly the Play Labs facilitator, the play leaders, they have developed a capacity within a year compared to the parents' capacity, which came about in 2 years, far, far quicker. So that also gives that hope that you have creating an ECD workforce across the community, which can be a potential not only for future social enterprises, where you can bring in a livelihood opportunities for these young women, but at the same time provide ECD. So there's a lot of creative things we can think about and not just looking at the government. At the same time, bring in social enterprises and catalysts in there. So I think this is a very, very exciting space going forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and thank you for hinting around the innovations on financing, because it isn't just about reallocating funding from government, it's about also how you bring new funding to the table. Let me kick off the last round of questions here, and just very, very briefly, as your closing remarks, ask each of you to share with the audience, given the urgency around early childhood development and that you're all committed to increasing funding to this space, what are your organizations going to do differently? What do you expect the global education community to do differently next year in 2022 in financing early childhood development? Asif, can I start with you?
Thank you. We are very privileged and fortunate to partner with Lego Foundation, and we have a great partners, Brookings and Sesame. We are all working together in this. So I think the science is there, the evidence is there. Now it's a matter of just do it, right? So how do we? Our plan is that everything is open sourced in terms of the playbook. If you Google BRAC playbook, you find the entire sort of curriculum material that is online. Our goal is in 2022, in January, we're going to launch the global strategy for an expansion. We are targeting that the strategy will ensure that we get to at least 10 million children in 5 years. And that's not going to be just done by BRAC, but the whole idea of making it open and bringing in more and more partners, as Anita mentioned, that this is going to be a collective effort. So bringing private sector, other partners, other foundations to come in and buy into this and look at different models, whether it's technical assistance with the government, social enterprise model, direct service delivery. So there's a lot of opportunity we want to pursue going forward. So we are very, very committed on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Michael, are you still with us virtually, or did we lose him?
Yeah, I'm here still. Thanks,
Great,
Maysa.
thank you. Do you want to share your thoughts? We can't see you on screen, but we can hear you.
Okay.
There you are.
So I think one part is, having worked in this area for quite some time, we're very good at talking about the long-term returns to investment. But I think we're not as good about talking about how much things cost now and how to pay for it. And I think that's something that we need to get better at if we're going to convince people to spend more in this area, and also how to show some of the short-term returns. And I think that anybody who has a small child, and I do, for example, and during COVID, one day had childcare and one day didn't, knows what the short-term returns are to productivity and to their own health. And then the last is the advocacy part. I think young children have lost a lot during the last couple of years. It's had big impacts not only on their learning, but on their health, nutrition. So I think bringing to the fore the kind of hidden cost of the pandemic on children and families in a very strong way to be able to protect the budgets that already exist and increase them is important. And to do that, I think we really need to diversify the constituency that advocates for this. And I think there's a lot of potential for people who work with children and families to work more closely with people who work on issues like gender equality at this moment to have a stronger voice for these kids and their families and what they need.
Thank you very much. Dr. Yido, just briefly, if you can share the message of what you think the global education community needs to do differently to support early childhood development.
I think that I will take the last word of
Michael.
Yes, Michael, the advocacy part. This is where we are going to push and work with our member states to let them understand that there are a lot of things, values, skills that we want our learners to acquire, but it's too late sometime at primary level. So if we start them in the values that we want them to acquire in early childhood education will make better results. So the importance of this is one area of advocacy. The second advocacy is to move from luxury to a right in early childhood education. I'm from Africa. I was born in a village, and 50 kilometers around my village there's no early childhood education opportunity. You have to go beyond 50 kilometers. And the first city is there, but it is a private schools. The early childhood education in developing countries is private enterprise, so it is not affordable for poor people. So it's a luxury to go to an early childhood education. So how to move from luxury to rights for the people in the developing country is something we should advocate more for. The last thing for which we should advocate is really to get government to invest more and make early childhood education a necessary complementary aspect of formal education, and then start investing in early childhood before going beyond. And this is part of the advocacy that we are going to work on. UNESCO being an intergovernmental organization, is easier for us to have this advocacy with the ministers of education in our meetings, and this is things we are going to work on the basis of evidence to show the added value of investing in early childhood education.
Thank you, Dr. Yido. And Anita, may I give you the last word, please, on this?
Yeah, and I would just say, I think as the Lego Foundation, as a foundation that receives 25% of the profits of the Lego Group, we are privileged to continue funding and will be continuing to invest. I think the recent pandemic, climate change is also calling up on us and on the foundation, and it's something that we are not very experienced in, is looking at how do we get investments out quicker when it comes to acute responses in disaster or crisis-affected settings. So we've been shying away a little bit on looking at the recovery phase, and we want to look at what would it look like to also give funding. And recent investments in Afghanistan and Haiti have shown that we can do that. And are looking at that. I also think there's an opportunity. It was really interesting and really important to see how we can transform education, and we can start early with gender norms and reducing stereotypes through early childhood education, exclusion issues, bring in diversity issues. I think there's a lot that we can also do at the foundation. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Colleagues, what you heard today is that these organizations are very committed to early childhood development. We're starting to see quite a bit of momentum as part of the global education movement to focus on early childhood development as part and parcel of the investment that we're making globally. And we're starting to see some progress, and I am very happy to see our next panel here, and my colleague and friend Yasmin Sharif, who heads up the Education Cannot Wait, has already made a commitment to invest 10% of ECW's budget in early childhood development, which is a very important progress. Yeah, round of applause there. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you, Michael, for being with us virtually, and I'll hand over to the next session.